We're at the hold short line for runway 29 at King City, California, about to take off VFR on a beautiful clear day on a cross-country flight to the northeast, bound for Fresno Chandler Executive Airport. This flight will be conducted entirely in Class G and E airspace, terminating below the outer ring of Fresno International's Class C airspace, meaning we won't need to talk to an air traffic controller at any portion of the flight. In fact, besides the traffic callouts at our departure and destination, both pilot-controlled non-towered airports, we may not use our radios much at all. However, we may still choose to establish communication with air traffic control for the en route portion of our flight. Approach and center facilities can provide what's called radar traffic information services, or flight following, to VFR aircraft like ours. This video, like hundreds of others, make up the body of knowledge of Flight Insight ground schools. Complete your training and join hundreds of other pilots by enrolling in private, instrument, or one of the specialty courses on offer at flight-insight.com. Dash on over there today. Before we depart here, let's have a look to see how we will get in touch with air traffic control after we take off. Flight following doesn't begin on the ground when we're at a non-towered airport. It's requested from an approach or center controller once we're in the air. We'll need to identify the appropriate facility to contact. The easiest way to often do this is to have a look at the airport page in the chart supplement. In the communications section, it'll typically list an approach or center control frequency. Here, however, we only see the CTAF for the airport. There is a phone number for Oakland Center, which is used for clearance delivery for IFR aircraft. We might call them on the ground and ask if there's an appropriate frequency, but we can also look around for the answer ourselves. A nearby airport to the southeast, Paso Robles, may have a frequency listed in their airport page, and having a look, we see that it does in fact list Oakland Center as the facility to contact on 128.7. Another option is to wait until we're airborne and contact flight service. The nearest VOR, Big Sur, shows the FSS facility in this area is Oakland Radio, so we could contact them and ask what a good frequency might be. There are several other options as well. So we'll use that frequency we found, 128.7, and set it into our COM1 standby. We'll be contacting Oakland Center once we're clear of the traffic pattern here. Now, having a look at our route of flight, we see that it cuts right through these MOAs on the other side of the mountains. We'll plan our flight to the north by first flying direct to the Panoche VOR and then following the 070 radial away from it, which will keep us clear of the MOA. So we'll set the Panoche VOR into our nav 1. For altitude, we'll plan to fly at 7,500, which will give us plenty of terrain clearance and should avoid bothering those California condors that are around pinnacles here. So let's depart, and while we're doing so, we'll take a moment to discuss flight following. Controllers use radar to identify and track aircraft that are flying in their sector. Since they're able to see aircraft, they can identify ones that are close by ours and may intersect or pass close to our flight path. The controller will be able to provide an alert about this aircraft to help us see and avoid it. Now, using flight following doesn't relieve us pilots of the responsibility to continuously scan for aircraft while we're VFR, and we can't rely on always getting a traffic call out for every aircraft that might be a hazard. But it can greatly help us stay safe while we're en route. Controllers by and large welcome us VFR pilots participating in flight following. It adds a bit more to their workload, but means that there's just one more aircraft in their sector that they're talking to and know what their intentions are, making everyone a little safer. That being said, controllers have the absolute right to refuse flight following services to VFR aircraft for things like traffic congestion or other reasons. Also, once an aircraft is participating in flight following, the controller can choose to discontinue it by saying, radar service is terminated. As VFR pilots, we should always be ready for the possibility that the air traffic controller will drop us. When we make our first call to Oakland Center, they won't be expecting it or know anything about where or who we are. It's helpful once we've switched over to the approach frequency to listen in for a bit and make sure it's not too busy. Our first radio call can be simple, just to establish radio contact, or if it's not too busy, we can say our entire request. Let's think about that request. Who are we talking to? Oakland Center. Who are we? Cessna 518 Foxtrot Tango. Where are we? We're climbing, about 35 miles southwest of the Panoche VOR. What do we want? We want flight following to Fresno Chandler Executive Airport at 7,500 feet. It's a lot of info, so make sure you say it in your head a few times or even write out the important parts like we've done here before you key that mic. So here's the request. Oakland Center, Cessna 518 Foxtrot Tango. We're a Cessna 172 climbing through 3,500, approximately 35 miles southwest of the Panoche Vortac. Request flight following to Chandler Executive, Foxtrot Charlie Hotel at 7,500 feet. Okay, let's pause and analyze this transmission. We've set our call sign, but we've also set our aircraft type. The controller will want to know this so that they know our speed and climb capabilities. When we say where we are, it's a great idea to use VORs as a reference. There are tons of little airports like King City in a controller's sector, but the controller will be very familiar with VORs, so when we make our position report, it's easier to look on the scope and find us. We also said the altitude we're climbing out of. Remember, the controller is responsible for a 3-dimensional block of airspace. It's important to give vertical as well as geographic position information. We set our destination, Chandler Executive, but we also gave the 3-letter identifier, Foxtrot Charlie Hotel. Again, there are tons of airports around, and when the controller uses their software to locate our destination, they'll be keying in the identifier, so this is helpful. We can drop the first letter kilo from the identifier as it's assumed we're staying in the continental US. Finally, we're giving our planned cruising altitude. This is helpful for our intentions as well. Here comes the controller with the response.
518 Foxtrot Tango, Oakland Center, Squawk 5474.
Squawk 5474, Cessna 518 Foxtrot Tango. So we've been assigned a squawk code. We put that into our transponder and make sure it's set to altitude mode. The controller will associate the information we just gave about our flight and intentions with this code and will look for us on his screen to identify us. To aid in this, the controller will sometimes ask us to ident, which means hitting our ident button on the transponder, causing our target on the screen to blink, kind of like we're waving to the controller saying, "Here I am." Once he sees us, he'll come back and say,
Number 518 Foxtrot Tango, you're at contact 30 Southwest Panoche. What altitude would you like to get the FCH at?
So we've gotten the magic words, radar contact. This means that we've been identified on the controller's scope, both in our position as well as in our assigned squawk code, and that radar flight following services are being provided. We'll be under flight following until we hear radar contact lost or radar services terminated. He also gave us our position information as he sees it, which should jive with where we know ourselves to be. The controller has also asked us to verify the altitude we'd like to go to Chandler at. We'll be at 7,500 to Chandler, November 518 Foxtrot Tango. So it's as simple as that. We now have flight following for our route to Chandler. Because we're making a detour to Panoche instead of flying direct in order to avoid those MOAs, it's a very good idea to loop the controller in on this. It's a sizable enough detour that he'll notice we're not traveling in the direction of our destination, and he may need to coordinate with another air traffic control sector in that area. Center Cessna 518 Foxtrot Tango, we're going to be flying direct to the Panoche Vortac and then direct destination in order to avoid the MOAs to the east.
Mary Foxtrot Tango, roger.
So we're all set up. The controller, in addition to his other duties, is keeping an eye on our flight to see if any other aircraft could potentially conflict with us. In addition to this, he can play an informal role in helping with other aspects of the flight, such as advising on weather along our route, which he can overlay on his radar scope, or watching for airspace or flight restrictions which may be active on our route. These aren't the formal components of flight following, but can be helpful nonetheless. So every now and again we'll hear a traffic advisory from the controller that'll sound like this.
Number 518 Foxtrot Tango, traffic, 11 o'clock, 5 miles southeastbound. Altitude indicates 4,500, climbing VFR type unknown.
So the controller has given us an aircraft bearing based on our respective ground track, 11 o'clock, a distance from us, 5 miles, a direction and altitude, southeastbound and 4,500 climbing, and that he doesn't know what type aircraft it is. This is because it's a VFR aircraft that evidently isn't participating in flight following. We'll respond back, looking for traffic, November 518 Foxtrot Tango. As soon as we hear the traffic call, our eyes should look to the 11 o'clock position, making any corrections for wind drift if necessary. The aircraft is at 4,500 feet and climbing, so it's below us. It's moving southeast. We should look at our directional gyro and we can see that an aircraft moving southeastbound is moving left to right in front of us. so it's a potential conflict as it's climbing into our flight path. Now, we're not going to see anything here on the screen because I coordinated this traffic advisory with the controller in advance for instructional purposes. But when we did see that aircraft, we would say, Cessna 518 Foxtrot Tango has traffic in sight, will maintain visual separation.
Right, Foxtrot Tango, Roger. Thanks. He shows a 5,500 now and climbing.
The controller now knows that we're able to see and avoid the traffic and can stop giving advisories about it. Now, eventually we'll be at the point where we're leaving this controller's sector and entering into another. We're talking to Oakland Center, which typically provides radar services in areas that are more rural like the one we've come from. Now that we're a bit further north, we're in between larger areas like the Bay Area to our west and Fresno to our east, so the approach facility, NorCal, can handle us. We'll get a handoff to NorCal Approach, meaning the controller has provided our information to the next controller, who has accepted our flight following, so there's no need to re-request that or get a new squawk code. And they're now ready for us to contact them. A handoff begins with an instruction from the current controller to switch, sounding like this.
Right, Foxtrot Tango, contact NorCal Approach 121.3.
Contact NorCal Approach 121.3, November 518 Foxtrot Tango. So we're now done with this frequency. We can dial in 121.3 on the COM1 standby, flip it to active, and make our first contact with the new controller. NorCal Approach Cessna 518 Foxtrot Tango is level at 7,500, direct Panocha VOR. A quick confirmation of our altitude and course is helpful. The controller will respond,
For 518 Foxtrot Tango, NorCal Approach Monterey, altimeter 3019er.
3019 November 518 Foxtrot Tango. So we could set the new altimeter setting in. As we continue, we reach a new ATC sector. NorCal Approach is responsible for a large area, and they've split their areas of control into different sectors, assigned different frequencies. So from time to time, we'll get handoffs from one sector to another within NorCal, even though the person we may be handed off to could be sitting just beside the previous one. The sectional chart doesn't list where these sectors begin and end.
For 518 Foxtrot Tango, contact NorCal 120.905.
Contact NorCal 120.905, November 518 Foxtrot Tango. So same thing as before, we'll set the new frequency, flip it to active, listen for a bit, then make our first call. NorCal Approach Cessna 518 Foxtrot Tango, level at 7,500, direct Panocha VOR.
Number 518 Foxtrot Tango, NorCal, the Modesto altimeter 3015.
3015, November 518 Foxtrot Tango. It's becoming routine at this point. We'll continue onto the final leg of our route to Chandler, and we get to about 25 or 30 miles out from our destination. Chandler Executive lies beneath the outer shelf of Fresno International's Class C airspace. We could remain outside by flying underneath it below 2,500 feet, but normally it's around this time that we want to contact Fresno Approach if we were going to enter. So we'll actually get that handoff now from NorCal.
Number 518 Foxtrot Tango, contact Fresno Approach 119.6.
Contact Fresno Approach 119.6, Cessna 518 Foxtrot Tango. We dial that in, flip it active, listen for a bit, and then Fresno Approach Cessna 518 Foxtrot Tango is level at 7,500 feet, inbound to Chandler Executive.
Number 518 Foxtrot Tango, Fresno Approach to Chandler, altimeter 3016.
So now, in the process of being on flight following, we've also established two-way radio communication with Fresno Approach, the prerequisite to entry into the Charlie airspace. We can plan our descent to either stay out or go in as desired. So we can grab the weather at Chandler, brief our approach, and begin our descent. We'll be on the lookout for the airport, and when we see it, can cancel flight following. Sometimes the controller will anticipate this and cancel our flight following for us.
Right, Foxtrot Tango, no traffic between you and Chandler. Change advisory frequency approved, and just keep your squawk code for me. You'll be landing underneath the Charlie airspace.
Fresno is canceling our radar services and telling us we can switch to the CTAF frequency and to keep our squawk code since we'll be below the Charlie. Normally we'd be instructed to squawk VFR or 1200. We'll stay on this code and change over to advisory, November 518 Foxtrot Tango. So that concludes our flight following. It adds some extra steps to a VFR cross country that would otherwise be free of radio communication, but as we saw with that traffic crossing in front of us over the mountains, that extra set of eyes in the radar system ATC can leverage can make a whole lot of difference in terms of safety of flight. Many pilots choose to use flight following on almost all of their VFR cross-country flights for this reason. It's like having a protective parent following you around and nudging you back in the right direction if you ever need it.